Welcome to citiesabc.com series of interviews with global and leading thought leaders, experts and people shaping the world and creating new narratives for our world and business industry. citiesabc.com is a new 4AR smart cities digital platform for reinventing and uniting cities, universities and citizens, and as well empowering them in terms of using AI, open AI, and data in a way that is owned by them and not managed by them. And is created by a team of global industry leaders, academics, and experts. Today we have with us someone that I deeply admire and as well been following for a long time, Dr. Ben Goertzel, a leading world-recognized artificial intelligence researcher, thinker, and serial entrepreneur. And I would say as well an artist, at least a writer, which I like some of the things you've been writing. Ben is as well the founder and CEO of SingularityNET, the Chairman of OpenCog Foundation, the Chairman of the Artificial General Intelligence Society, the Chief Scientist of Mozi Health, and the Vice Chairman of Humanity Plus. And his work and ideas are influencing the way we perceive AI, and the way as well we see a lot of the things and developments in terms of blockchain, ideas, thought leadership. But one thing I like a lot is the focus and evangelization and going from the theory to the practice. Welcome to our podcast and the video interview, Ben. Is a huge honor.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to start, and I know your profile quite well, but I think I would like to start. I know that you were born in Rio de Janeiro, so Brazil. I'm Portuguese, so I have a lot of relationship with Brazil, but I would like to go for your education, because I know that someone that has so bright ideas and as well so sharp in terms of the way you want to change and transform the world, it all comes normally by childhood and as well education. So could you get us a bit of your personal background and history?
Sure. So as you know, that I was born in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, but I'm a fake Brazilian. I'm the world's worst Brazilian. My Portuguese is horrible, but my father actually was doing his PhD in sociology in the late 1960s, and he was studying Brazilian student politics for his thesis. So he spent 4 years in Brazil doing thesis research, conveniently avoiding the draft for the Vietnam War at the same time. And so I was born there. I'm a dual U.S. Brazilian citizen, but I was less than 2 years old when my parents, who were both American, moved me back to the U.S. And yeah, my dad got his PhD in sociology right around the time that I was born, and he was a sociology professor for many years. Began as a Marxist sociology professor and had a textbook of Marxist sociology, and then sort of retracted from Marxism to more sort of conventional liberal point of view. But he was at Rutgers University for 40 plus years, and I'd say certainly Ted Goertzel, my dad. I mean, I learned a lot from Ted through my childhood and ongoingly, because he knew a huge amount about not so much hard sciences, but everything in politics, philosophy, history, and economics, everything in the human domain. My grandfather, my mother's father, Leo Zwell, was a physical chemist, a crystallographer, and he's really the one who interested me in science in the first place, because he had worked with, Linus Pauling and a whole bunch of the famous physicists and chemists throughout the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So that was an interesting world to have a window into. He gave me his whole book collection on quantum mechanics and so forth when I was a kid. I'd say it was my dad who got me into science fiction, though. I mean, my grandfather got me into math and science, but he was an experimentalist. He was a very hard-nosed realist. My dad got me hooked on the original Star Trek and Kirk and Spock and the the vast unknown of alien civilizations and robots and telepathy and all the crazy stuff. So after seeing Star Trek in Space 1999 and stuff on TV, I dug into science fiction literature very early on. My mom, while her career is in social work, she's a executive of nonprofit social welfare organizations. She was always strong in mathematics also, and she loved to teach me astronomy, physics, algebra, and so forth. So I'd say my education, I didn't. My parents taught me a lot, and I was constantly reading. School was just a chance to sit there and try to read a book on my lap surreptitiously. I didn't learn much from teachers. I would say I was pretty far ahead of the curriculum, and then I went to university at age 15 and graduated at 18, and then got my PhD at 22 and started my career. So that's I think by that point, by the time I got my bachelor's degree at age 18, I'd already been thinking about the AGI problem and how to create thinking machines for a few years, and I was probably a bit over optimistic then. I didn't understand how hard it is to build real systems that work. I sort of thought, well, we basically know how the mind and brain work, so it shouldn't be that hard to build a general intelligence based on this knowledge. And now, decades later, my basic understanding of the problem hasn't changed too much, but I've gained greater respect for the challenges in building large systems that require a lot of people to work together, and integration of knowledge and expertise from different areas.
Oh, that's amazing, and I think there's so much things in your background that explains your wonderful vision of the world, and as well or let's say large vision of looking at things from a very perspective and large ways. So one of the things that I'm particularly interested to see, and there's a lot of interviews with you that touch a lot of different areas. I will try to go to some specific areas. So as you mentioned, you've been trying to build big artificial general intelligence systems, and as well that have big collaboration in terms of different ideas and different areas. And that's probably what made you build probably your biggest platform. So how would you see this part? And I think this is particularly important to look at the way you see artificial intelligence, and as well demystify the concept of artificial general intelligence, which is one of the terms that you use more, but as well open AI. So how do you see that nowadays, and bearing in mind all the different nuances that we have when we look about artificial intelligence and the ways that people can go?
Yeah, the AI field, as you know, goes back a long way. The term AI was coined in the late 1950s, but the basic dimensions of the field were there in the 1930s. So you could look in Norbert Wiener's book Cybernetics, and that's basically about AI. It's about the common information and control properties between biological systems and engineered systems, including electrical systems. So AI has been around a while, and when I first started reading about AI in the 1970s, honestly, the core concepts were the same as they are now. You had people building neural networks in the 50s and 60s. You had you had logic systems, you had the concept of integrating multiple kinds of AI algorithms and networks into a common system. You had the idea of learning AI systems that can learn by their own experience. So like when I look at the news now, like last week there's an article on VentureBeat, which is like Yoshua Bengio and Jan LeCun, two AI gurus, say that self-supervised learning is the key to AI. And I mean, those are both great guys. They're great researchers. They're great human beings. And I mean, of course, the idea that self-supervised learning is the key to AI was known in the 1930s. And I mean, that was part of active research with loads of publications in the 1970s. And those guys presumably know that also. So I think there's a lot of long-standing ideas and intuitions and experimental projects from the field of AI that are now starting to bear practical fruit, just because the supporting technologies are in better shape now, right? So we have computers that are faster, we have computers with a lot more memory, we have so much more data to feed into our machines, we have sensors and actuators that can let our machines interact real time with the environment much more effectively. And because of that, a lot of ideas that in concept have been around for a while, they're getting refined in detail and are yielding amazing practical fruit. And this is makes it a very exciting time to be in the AI field, right? Because there's sort of this there's this backlog of deep thinking, which is getting scaled up and refined and integrated, and then it's yielding incredible results in one after another domain. And I think it's that's going to continue without slowing down. So I mean, what we've seen in the last few years, we've seen deep neural networks, which have been around since the 1960s, and in some ways before that, the late 40s even, but in fairly mature form in the late 60s. You're seeing deep neural networks, deployed on very powerful multi-GPU machines and applied to huge amounts of data and yielding awesome results, right? Like things that are by now extremely commonplace, like face recognition and machine translation. And then, deep neural nets together with other technologies like simulation engines and game trees, learning used to beat Go and all sorts of other games. But that's just the beginning, right? I mean, there's a host of other AI techniques that also have tremendous promise and some results behind them, like evolutionary learning, where you have an AI that simulates the evolutionary process to create new things, and logical theorem proving, logical inference, which has been around again in AI since 60s and before. But now, due to the scaling up of the infrastructure, I think we're going to see tremendous advances in machine reasoning. So I think we're going to see all this intellectual depth from the history of the AI field get scaled up and rolled out and integrated with each other. And along with new ideas that pop up along the way, this is going to lead us to artificial general intelligence. And the end game is kind of clear in a way. It's AIs that are smarter than people, like we had in the science fiction I read it in my early youth. And then by that point, as I.J. Good said in 1965, the first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention humanity needs to make, right? And then we better hope we did a good job of inculcating an affection for humanity into these super AIs. But the more subtle and vexing question, in a way, is the pathway from here to there. Like, how do we get from where we are now to having a superhuman AGI? What we have now are narrow AIs using deep learning and other techniques, narrow AIs that do highly specific things quite well. And we're going to get from there in the next years or decades to AIs that can generalize and imagine and create and make leaps of imagination and generalization as well as people can or better. But what does that incremental path look like? I mean, it may be several paths in parallel. So in robotics, say we go from current narrow robots toward robots with general understanding of the everyday common sense world. In medicine, we go from sort of statistical tools for helping scientists analyze data step by step toward a full autonomous AGI bioscientist, right? So we're in these different vertical areas, we're progressing step by step from narrow AI toward AGI. And then there's a certain amount of cross-cutting among the vertical areas as well, as you have common AI tools and increasingly more sharing of knowledge across AIs applying to different verticals and gradually gaining more general intelligence. So now, we're at a super interesting time because narrow AI has hit the big time. AGI is still in the research phase, but you now have billions of dollars going into that research. And we're seeing both ongoing penetration of narrow AI through more and more areas and gradual transitioning from narrow AI step by step toward AGI, which can seem painstakingly slow sometimes when you're in the middle of it. But if you take a step back, I mean, it's amazing how fast AI is progressing year on year at this stage.
So one of the things I want to touch, and I think probably looking at OpenAI and all the work you've been doing with SingularityNET, SingularityNET and OpenCog Foundation, which is a lot in the idea of, first of all, creating a benevolent AI, but as well opening AI to be, like you said, creating an AGI that it loves us. And actually, there was a fantastic interview in the SingularityNET, the idea of creating a loving AI, which I love that, and there's more research that works with you. So can you tell us about the creation of SingularityNET, which is, you are the CEO and founder, and as well OpenCog, the main projects that we are working on?
Absolutely. So I mentioned that a couple things already that lead up to these themes. I mean, one is the idea that there's a bunch of different paradigms and approaches to AI that have been around a long time in the historical literature. Neural nets being one, logic systems, evolutionary systems, and constraint satisfaction systems. There's a whole lot of AI paradigms. And so one possibility is that the ultimate solution to AI is just take some specific algorithm and make it better and better and better. Another possibility is what's going to happen is there's going to be many different AIs with different strengths and weaknesses that cooperate together synergetically to lead to general intelligence, right? So that's the potential that integration and emergent interaction of many different AIs together is going to be the key to AGI. That's one important thread underlying the two projects, OpenCog and SingularityNET, that you mentioned. Now, another important thread that leads up to these projects is the question, who controls the AGI? I mean, ultimately, the AGI controls itself, and humans aren't going to control a superhuman AI any more than chimpanzees or bacteria are going to control humans. On the other hand, in the early stages, humans are going to control the first AGIs. We're going to control the power switch, and we're the ones deciding what data the AGI looks at, and so and what problems it's set to solve as it progresses toward general intelligence and hones its intelligence on doing practical things, right? So that then, in that case, there's several possibilities at the high level. One possibility is some big company owns the early stage AGI. Then the mandate of that early stage AGI, in essence, is increase shareholder value for that company. Another possibility is a government controls the early stage AGI, and then the mandate for the AGI is, well, increase the well-being of that nation, which created it. Then another possibility is that the AGI is created, within more of a diffuse and self-organized open network of multiple participants. And I mean, open source software would be the biggest practical example of that we have. Like Linux is created by a uncanny conglomeration of different people and parties contributing open source software to the same code base. It's different than how Microsoft Windows or Mac OS X is created. And Linux is the dominant operating system on the planet, underlying the vast majority of servers on the internet, plus underlying the Android phone operating system, and running on the majority of embedded devices, right? So in Linux, you have a case where it's neither a big company nor a country, but it's a diffuse self-organizing network. And so OpenCog, picking up on these two themes, OpenCog is an open source artificial general intelligence oriented software project which tries to bring together multiple different AI tools coming from different paradigms to work together in growing intelligence of a common knowledge base. So you have this knowledge graph, a weighted labeled hypergraph, a knowledge hypergraph called the atom space, and many different AI tools acting together on this knowledge hypergraph, a logic engine, neural networks, an evolutionary learning system, an episodic memory system, a bunch of things. And they're each reading information from, doing learning, then putting information back in this knowledge hypergraph. And it's an open source project, meaning we're looking to, and are already to some extent pulling in contributions from developers, researchers, and thinkers all over the world with different backgrounds, and anyone can fork the code and make their own version and do something with it, right? So we're not looking to own it or control it. We're looking to put a certain set of ideas and a body of software out there so that it can grow and crystallize into something amazing. Now, SingularityNET is in some ways along the same lines, but it's a little broader, because in OpenCog you have this knowledge graph and you're creating a bunch of AI tools that will cooperate closely together on this knowledge graph. So that's a tight integration of different AIs. On the other hand, in SingularityNET, what we're building is more like a society of minds. You have a whole bunch of different AI agents, which could be created by different people. They don't have to be open source. Some of them can be open source. They may be pursuing different goals. Some of them may be acting on encrypted data and don't tell the other agents what they're doing. But the different AI agents in this network, they're sending information to each other. They're outsourcing work to each other. They're collaborating on solving problems. So whereas OpenCog is tightly integrating different AI tools on the same knowledge graph, SingularityNET is loosely integrating multiple AI tools within more of a society of AI agents. And this looser integration means you have a different business model. I mean, OpenCog, a given OpenCog instance is one software system because it needs close communication and knowledge sharing between the different AIs that are running within the same OpenCog system. It's more like a team of developers working together on the same project inside the same company or something. SingularityNET can be more like a whole economy of AI minds, where anyone can put an AI into the SingularityNET network. That AI can offer AI services to anyone else who needs them. It can negotiate payments and so forth. And then that AI can both do business with whoever wants to order its services, but that AI can also outsource some of the work to other AIs in the same network. And so then you have an economy of minds with AIs outsourcing work to other AIs, to outsourcing work to other AIs, sharing data as they need to, as they go about their business. So it's a society and economy of minds that to some level can become a mind itself on the emergent level. And blockchain was introduced here as the sort of underlying infrastructure for implementing this whole AI network, because we wanted there to be no central controller and no central governor or master of the network. Like SingularityNET should just be a community of a bunch of AIs that are all thrown out there, and each one of them can talk to the other AIs in the network. They can communicate with each other. They can form coalitions to help solve problems, but there shouldn't be any one central controller supervening over the whole network. It should be an open and self-organizing system. And this is how SingularityNET functions. We're then using OpenCog to create some of the agents running within the SingularityNET network. So OpenCog, which itself integrates many AI algorithms, is used to power some of the AI agents living inside SingularityNET, and then other AI agents living in SingularityNET are running on other software platforms that have nothing to do with OpenCog. And right now, a bunch of the stuff in the SingularityNET platform is coded by myself and my own SingularityNET team. But I mean, the goal is to make this a widely adopted open platform where the AIs in there are written by, everyone from everywhere. And we're then bringing the broadest possible collection of participants into the creation of this society of minds. So that, I mean, we start out with a technical idea for how to create, emergent AI by tightly and loosely connecting together different AI algorithms. But you end up verging into not only business, but also sort of political-ish domains, right? Because in the end, you're talking about democracy versus oligarchy or autocracy, right? And you're looking at issues like, who owns the data that's feeding the AI, where if the data is your face or your emails or your biometric data, who is controlling how that data is fed to AIs, and who gets the benefit of what the AI has learned from your data. So we get into a whole collection of broader issues beyond the technical, which is inevitable when the technology comes out of the research lab and becomes big time in terms of having real practical implications. But here the implications are even bigger than with most technologies, right? Because we're talking not only something that could affect national security or make multiple trillion-dollar companies. I mean, we're talking about something that plausibly within our lifetimes could create beings more intelligent than powerful than all of humanity. And we're talking about which systems are going to be the ones that grow into these potential, AI overlords, servants, or friends and collaborators, whichever they may turn out to be. Yeah. So the Loving AI project that you mentioned this was a sort of experimental project between OpenCog, SingularityNET, and Hanson Robotics, which made the Sophia robot. And we were looking there at, can we make an AI that experiences unconditional love toward humans and all sentient beings? And, what does that even mean? How would you engineer that? How would you teach that? And B, how would you take incremental steps toward that by using AIs to do loving things and spread love and learn about love now? And toward that end, we connected the Sophia robot to be a sort of meditation and consciousness expansion guide, and did a bunch of trials where Sophia, led people through these meditation and sort of deep listening sessions, which was quite interesting and had a very profound spiritual effect on some of the participants in these trials, which was fascinating to see. And I think, these loving AI trials, and then other work that we're doing now using our OpenCog and SingularityNET AI to help combat age-associated disease and to help combat COVID-19. I mean, all these applications of AI to ethically positive applications, I mean, these are, I think, extremely critical, both for helping people right now and for making sure that the AGI mind that we are collectively building and instructing, and whose organization we are collectively seeding, that this global AGI mind has, benevolence and compassionate on the mind as it ascends toward general intelligence, rather than, say, the primary applications of AI on the planet today, as you've heard me say before, are selling, killing, spying, and gambling. And those are all good fun in their proper place, I guess. But they're probably not the primary thing we want the early stage of our emerging global supermind to be preoccupied with.
Yeah, so I want to go through probably a philosophical question, because I'm as well a writer, and actually I come from poetry. So when you look at humanity, and I know that you are a philosopher in a lot of ways, so we have two versions of humanity. Okay, there are two kind of variations: the light side and the dark side. And if you look, for instance, at quotes from Stanley Kubrick, that created one of the most interesting films in reflecting AI, it was precisely about that, how he can, tries to kill his owner because he gets afraid. So in the evolution of humanity, normally the ones that survived, and if you look at evolutionary basis, is normally the ones that adapt faster, and that are able somehow to dominate, and sometimes they dominate because of based on good ideas or good philosophies, or sometimes purely based on force, or actually on more violent stuff. So how do you see that part? Because I think it's one of the things that I've seen a lot of.
I can't, regarding the light and the dark side, let me share a brief anecdote from my time. I lived in Washington, D.C. for 9 years and did AI consulting for a bunch of government agencies. I mean, including medical ones like NIH and CDC, but also some intelligence agencies. And a good friend of mine, he ran a software company that did consulting for many U.S. intelligence agencies. And he had a shaved head and a goatee and wore a black trench coat. He looked like a dark overlord to me. But his second in command, the VP of his company, looked like Superman. I mean, he wore a nicely cut, expensive suit, and his jaw was just very, very square. So I kept saying to my friend, like, you look like Darth Vader or something. Like you look like an dark overlord. How can you have Superman, who's a force of good, working as your second in command? And so my friend just said, well, Ben, you obviously haven't been in DC long enough. You haven't understood the nature of the relationship between good and evil. So I'm like, well, what is it? What is the relation between good and evil? I said, well, here in Washington, the relation between good and evil is a mutually rewarding business relationship. So, I think that's certainly a sociological observation about DC and big governments in general. But if you look at the evolution of humanity, you could see it in a related way, right? Like we evolved from two competing forces. One is individual selection, which is our DNA, wanted the DNA of the individual to keep propagating. And, we're still doing that. I have 4 kids and 1 grandchild now. I'm propagating my DNA. I'm being a good individual, right? On the other hand, there's also something called group selection in biology, where the DNA of the tribe evolves and intermixes in a way that will cause the propagation of the tribe, right? And these are quite different in implications, because group selection militates toward organisms that will help the whole tribe. So there's a certain amount of altruism there. And that can also happen on multiple levels, where the tribe looks bigger and bigger. But that's, of course, stronger effect with a smaller tribe, right? And so we have some aspects of our DNA that are oriented toward individual selection, some that are oriented toward group selection. So if you look at an ant colony, there's a lot of group selection there. Very often the ant will sacrifice itself for the good of the colony, right? And if you look at, say, a tiger or a lion or something, there's a lot of individual selection there, and there's not as much group selection in these types of animals. So I think we have that contradiction in ourselves. Evolution hasn't fully balanced these out. It remains an awkward balance, and this ends up being part of what we look at as dark versus light. I mean, there's some, of course, there are psychopaths in the world. There's some people who are sadists and just want to hurt others because they're twisted by things in their childhood. But a lot of what we see as dark versus light is just, we want to maximize our individual success and that of our progenitors, and we also have some level of altruistic streak where we want to maximize the good of our tribe, and that holds for various levels of how big the circle of the tribe is, right? Like we care more about our friends and neighbors than about people halfway around the world, but we care somewhat about people living halfway around the world, especially if they're right in front of us and we see them, which triggers the idea that maybe they're part of our tribe. So we have these contradictions baked into our DNA, and this is one of the things that makes it fascinating to think about passing human ethics and morals and human culture along to AIs, because it's not like we have a consistent, coherent set of ethics that we follow in our lives. We are all bundles of contradictions, right? And I mean, the process of living our lives is an endless and never to be completed process of partially resolving these contradictions step by step. So if we pass this along to the AI, what are we passing along? We're passing along a bundle of contradictions that's not entirely coherent, and the AI, not being exactly human, is going to undergo the process of, iteratively, partially resolving these contradictions, not quite the same way that a human would, right? And I'm not sure there's not a solution to that, right? I mean, because if you try to make an exact, coherent, logically consistent ethics and morality, maybe you can do that, but then that's not humanity, right? That's not actually what humans are, or what humans are are following. And I don't, that the level of our policy making and public discourse is generally so incredibly low that grappling with ideas, even like the ones I just described, let alone the much subtler ideas you encounter in actually building or teaching in AI, that's way beyond what governments or large corporations are going to be dealing with in their policy dictates, which basically means the evolution of superhuman AI is going to happen sort of off to the side of the policies that governments and corporations come up with regarding ethical guidance of AI, right? And that's it's very subtle, but yet I mean, subtle, complex, and contradictory doesn't have to lead to absolute nihilism, right? I mean, still, like as an AI developer, I have a choice. Do I work on AI for teaching kids? Do I work on AI for curing diseases? Do I work on AI for giving psychotherapy? Or do I work on AI for, say, making guided missiles better identify who to blow up, or who to psych into clicking over and over on ads to buy useless junk to get delivered to their house, right? So even though we don't have an entirely consistent human morality, still, I mean, on an intuitive basis, which is what we have, I mean, we can guide the AIs that we're creating in a direction that appears loving, compassionate, and beneficial, and appears to be driven, at least by a healthy balance of the individualistic and collectivist aspects of humanity. Or we can drive AI in a manner that's much more narrowly driven, like by the profit motive of a given company, or purely by the desire to advocate one tribe to the complete exclusion of the broader tribe. So I mean, I think it's tough and tangled up and complicated, but we're building AI and we're rolling it out anyway. So we can't just throw up our hands and say humanity's a mess, it's ill-defined, let's just seek for our own good, and the big picture is too big to think about. I think we can guide the big picture, and now more than any other time in history is a time when each of us as an individual, I mean, this is a critical point, each of us as an individual potentially could have a humongous impact on the outcome for our species and the outcome for the engineered species that we create, which may go way beyond what humans can do.
Yeah, I think you touch a critical element, and I on that level, I think all your work is always focused on as well creating a narrative for AI, which I think it's very important, because most of the AI researchers and most of the thinkers have much more a scientific approach towards AI, and you have a philosophical approach towards AI, which I think it's critical both in your work as a thinker and as a doer. So one of the things that I'm particularly, I respect that a lot, and I'm a huge fan of the work you've been doing, is how you dismantle the narrative, because a lot of the history of mankind and the evolution is about narratives and about storytelling, the Christian, the Muslim, and all these big narratives. So
it is, but as a poet, then you should realize that we need to get beyond narratives. I mean,
the narratives, yes, I'm with you.
I mean,
no, but at the same time, we need the point. If you look at the 20th century, and that is a good point. The 20th century was the meltdown of narratives. But at the same time, we created 2 world wars, and we got to this nihilist that you touch as well. So how do you create this benevolent AI that you are
Yeah,
building, and you are one of
it's
the leading
interesting that
personalities, but as well, how can we do that that can touch the rest of the world? Because the problem is the
thing
world
about
right now is the chaos in a lot of ways, psychological
yeah,
chaos.
it's a very weird and subtle point, and because the thing, the nature of narrative has occurred to me very often in applying AI to molecular biology, because when you apply AI to biological data, like to the 25,000 plus genes in the human genome and all the non-coding DNA, I mean, what you get is this vast cross-connected network where all these thousands of genes impact these tens of thousands of molecules. And you see that what human biologists have been trying to do is they're trying to find a story. They like want one gene to be the protagonist, and then you have this one process which leads to aging or cancer or something. And in reality, like there's no protagonist, there's no narrative. There's this network with tens of thousands of genes and millions of chemical compounds, and they're interacting in this complex network of ways that doesn't boil down to a few actors with a simple sequence of events. Like there's no beginning, middle, and end. There's no 3-act structure, right? I mean, it's not there. But biologists want it to be there, and the people funding grant proposals want it to be there, and venture capitalists hearing pitches from biotech startups want it to be there. But in molecular biology, which has its own reality apart from human stories, right, is not, it's actually not there. And you know, the same holds true in sociology and economics. The reality is also more of a complex self-organizing network than a narrative. But in molecular biology, it's harder to avoid the reality, right? Because it's coming out of your lab instruments. And in social science, people place their interpretation on reality to avoid seeing the reality more commonly. But yet the thing is, even though in a way the narrative isn't there, if you want to get things done in human society, you have
Yes,
to think in those terms. And yet in some ways the traditional concept of narrative is being reconstructed, right? Like if you look at like TikTok video app or something, everything's boiled down to 15 to 60-second videos. You're not telling a narrative in quite the conventional sense, but then of course there are stars on there, and for each star you have the series of 15-second videos that they emanate, and you are following the story of that star, right? I mean, Donald Trump cannot tell a story, but yet he is, you know, he is driving a fictional narrative
exactly.
in the minds of a lot of the people who are paying attention to him, right? So yeah, we're clearly in like a postmodernist
Yes.
era, right? Where I mean, narrative has been transcended, story and meaning have been transcended, yet people are then using all these postmodernist tools to just create, in a way, meta narratives on top of that are driving the reptile and mammal parts of the brains of all these all the people who are controlling allocation of resources, right? So it's very subtle, and I think ultimately it's a game AI will be able to play better than people. And you look, very recently, there's been an AI meme generator going around on the internet where you see that AI is able to generate funnier memes than people just by putting goofball captions on images, right? And so that's I think a hint of what's to come, where in this like postmodernist world of messaging, I mean, we're going to see AIs are able to master the art of pulling people's strings better than people can, right? And I mean, of course, Google AdSense is the best example of that, but it's behind the scenes, right? Whereas an AI meme generator is right in front of you, and you can see the same sort of process going on. And this again, this brings you back to, who controls the AI, because if AI is better able to direct people's minds than people are, right, then in the stage before the AI is a full-on AGI, like before the AI is deciding what direction to nudge people's minds in, well, who's deciding what direction the AI nudges people's minds in, right? And that again, you'd be happier if it's a sort of democratic, participatory, open system of people and machines working together than a centralized system. So another point about narratives, which comes out of cognitive science and has played a role in our work with OpenCog. I mean, another point is, it's well known that free will is mostly an illusion, right? I mean, setting aside there may be some ontological basic notion of freedom or choice in a philosophical sense, but in terms of the stories that people tell ourselves regarding why they freely chose to do this or that thing, these stories are almost all bullshit that are made up by the brain, right? And I mean, there are very clear biology experiments showing that. If anyone's not familiar, look up like Michael Gazzaniga's split brain experiments, or Benjamin Libet's experiments. So it's well known that the reasons why our brain does something are not the same as the stories that we tell ourselves why our brain did something. And there's many laboratory experiments set up to demonstrate this. Now, nevertheless, the stories that we make up as to why we did something seem to often be useful, right? So you come to the conclusion that, Friedrich Nietzsche said consciousness is like the army commander who retroactively takes responsibility for what his troops did, right? So the conclusion you come to looking at cognitive science is that's true, but the story the army commander made up for why the troops did, when broadcast to the troops, is useful for guiding the troops in their ongoing self-organizing activity. So the bullshit narratives we make up explaining what happened, they may not be accurate, but these narratives get infused back into the self-organizing processes that do something, and then they guide things to happen better next time. And the process of making up a narrative is in many ways, it's a symbolic AI process. So we get here into the combination of symbolic AI with neural AI, which is one of the integrations of multiple AI paradigms that happens in OpenCog and SingularityNET. And yeah, what we're seeing now is AI is playing a role not only in the actual decision making, but in the making up of stories about the decision making, and that feedback between story making and actual decision also involves a feedback between humans doing story making and actual decision versus AIs doing story making and an actual decision. And it's that feedback that is ultimately driving us on toward AGI and singularity, right? And it's again that's playing itself out across many different vertical areas in different ways, right? Like in molecular biology, it's playing it out, but the AI is analyzing the data, but the AI is also coming up with hypotheses, and that's really narrative making, right? And I mean, and in say we've been doing some work on applying AI to help combat the COVID-19 crisis, partly because I've been doing a lot of work applying AI to molecular biology with a goal toward life extension, right? So we had a spin-off of SingularityNET called Rejuve, aimed at rejuvenation, life extension. How can we use AI to help people who want to live a long time live longer and longer? some stuff about that at rejuve.io website. But with COVID-19 sweeping the globe, we're like, well, how can we use what we've been doing with life extension as a goal? How can we use that to help with COVID-19, right? Because of course, if you die of COVID, you're not going to live forever, right? So it's still, I mean, it's not going to, solving COVID doesn't solve mortality, but it's certainly a useful subcase. So there, we're looking at some fine-grained applications where we're looking at just helping some clinical trials with precision medicine. Like, how can you, if someone's doing a clinical trial of a COVID-19 related therapy, can you look in and sort of slice and dice which people this medicine will work well for and which people won't it work well for? So you can customize which medicines for which people. But we're also looking at AI for hypothesis making. Like, can you come up with a new idea for what kind of drug might help? Or looking at some traditional Chinese medicines. Could it be a combination of herbs and drugs that helps prevent COVID in some people? And then we're also looking at agent-based modeling. So can you use simulation models to better model what happens in a whole society, so that you can better estimate the likely impact of different policies against COVID-19? And there, in all these things, you have this interesting dialectic between the highly detailed data analytics work and the storytelling aspect of it, because you need, I mean, a biological hypothesis has to be something that makes sense to the human biologist. We're going to help design experiments based on it. And if the AI helps you come up with a more intelligent policy for managing people's movements and distancing and travel during COVID-19 spread, I mean, one thing, it's coming up with an optimal set of rules people should follow to maximize, personal well-being and economic benefit and minimize virus spread. Another thing is coming up with a set of rules that make sense to people, and you're able to communicate to them, right? So I mean, all these issues that we're talking about with the narrative and its relation to AI, these come up in one vertical market after another in different ways, and these are things society should be thinking about a lot more. But we seem to be, overall, most of society's resources seem to be stuck at a more primitive level somehow.
Yeah, and that is a very good point. So I would like to, and we passed 1 hour, but I still would like to be until you have time. So two areas that I would like to touch. So one, and I think it's very important to go from the theory to the practice. So you are both a philosopher, a code maker, an engineer, and a scientist, but as well an extreme mindful of a lot of different things, and as well a person that is focused on the benevolence. So how do you apply that as being as well CEO of quite big organizations worldwide? Because I think it's very important for people that are listening to us. We show a lot of people that are struggling with their families, with their life balance, with as well their more research, and of course the ones that are more in AI. But how do you manage that on your personal balance, being a father of 4 children, as well a grandfather, and as well a CEO of big corporations, or corporation organizations, let's put it in a good way. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, how to balance all the different things in my personal life. It has been an ongoing adventure to which I have had no systematic answer. But I think, as with many things in human life, I think the state of consciousness that you bring to it is the key thing, because if you're involved in a field where things are changing as rapidly as they are in AI and in the tech business world, like there is going to be no one answer to any question, be it a scientific or or technological or a personal life question. There's not likely to be a fixed answer that holds in practice for a long time. I think I remember about 15 years ago, I realized I was having a sort of mental problem wherein no matter what I was doing, I was just beating myself up for not doing something else. Like, I'm playing with my kids, I'm like, I should be working. I'm working, I'm like, I should be playing with my kids. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, why are you doing this? Like, just, you know,
Narrative as well.
duh, like, just make the most of what you're doing at that moment. I mean, take a little time to reflect on how much time you want to spend on what, make your best decision, and then just do it. And I think I've managed to do that reasonably well. So I mean, at least I mean, when I'm working, I'm fully in that. If I'm with my family, I'm fully in that. And I think if you manage to maintain a certain mental balance through the various ups and downs of both personal and professional life, then so far I've found you can manage the work-life integration okay, but it's an ongoing challenge. And I don't, my life has been too crazy to think of it as work-life balance, which is where I grabbed from somewhere the work-life integration term instead. Because I mean, if you know, I had 2017, I was spending almost all year just flying around spreading the word about SingularityNET, and then on flights here and there, or late at night in hotel rooms, I was doing a bunch of math theory and AI work, and it worked better than it should have. But then we did the ICO for SingularityNET, the initial fundraising event to let us scale up the project in December 2017. Then we had a baby in January 2018, right? And that's it. So then I was like, well, now I'm gonna stay home and do, you know, more technical and writing work. I'm not gonna stop traveling all over like crazy. That lasted like 5 months, and then my wife and I were traveling all over like crazy with the baby for a year and a half. He was in, I think, by age 2, he'd been in 28 different countries or something.
It's impressive.
Yeah,
So,
it is madness. And my wife, obviously, who also has an AI PhD, was very tolerant. Now I've been in one place for a couple months, which is almost unprecedented. Just it's too hard to travel anywhere. You get locked
yes.
you get locked up in quarantine, right? And I guess as with many people, it's an open question. What will be the long-term impact of this? Like, am I going to get used to staying at home and getting more hands-on research work done, or as soon as the travel restrictions are lifted, is it going to be like, wow, I can get the hell out of here again, right? So, and
No, I understand.
yeah,
So I have 2 questions. I know that you have probably like 15 minutes more or less, but I'll try to be seated. So one thing that I would like to touch, and I think you are probably one of the few AI, world-recognized AI scientists and as well entrepreneur that has been touching all the areas of blockchain, from an ICO that you just mentioned, from as well working with Vitalik in terms of trying to create more awareness in the blockchain world.
sure.
And as well, you are using blockchain in the right way, which is kind of something that most of people are still trying to struggle to find the balance between crypto, the blockchain part, and things like that. So, what would be your balance between AI and blockchain? Because these are 2 technologies very powerful, and especially you've been working on Hong Kong, and right now, for instance, the Chinese government launched the BCN initiative that is going for 200 cities and probably around the world, which is quite innovative and very centralized, which is partly different from a lot of the vision. So how do you see, first of all, your work in blockchain world, but as well, this kind of 360 areas between blockchain and AI, which are 2 of the probably most radical technology of our times, and as well ideologies as well.
I think AI is the most fundamental technology that humanity will create, because AI is going to lead to the transcendence of humanity itself and the creation of more intelligent and capable minds, and ultimately the fusion of those humans who want to with these superhuman minds, right? So that's of a profound importance that not a lot of things can touch, right? And I think blockchain is a very powerful technology in the same sense that, say, computer networking is a very powerful technology. I mean, blockchain is a key methodology for coordinating, a distributed network of computing systems without requiring a central controller. And I mean, that's valuable for financial systems. It can be valuable for medical information systems. It can be valuable in Internet of Things, or for AI, as we're doing in SingularityNET, for data management, as Ocean Protocol is doing. So it's a highly valuable technology, but certainly not as fundamental as artificial intelligence. But I think that blockchain has the potential to play a critical role in the evolution of artificial intelligence via enabling the rollout of global AI networks that don't have a central controller, right? And blockchain, the first applications were in finance with Bitcoin and so forth. But in finance, you have a lot of regulatory issues, which are going to make it there'll be an obstacle for decentralization to really take hold in terms of blockchain-based finance applications, because there's a lot of rules regarding financial transactions in attempts to stomp out money laundering and so forth, and tax avoidance, and the governments want to keep track of financial transactions, and that's a challenge. So I mean, you can use blockchain in a lot of different ways, right? So the Chinese government will build blockchains that help them to keep better control over their country than they would have otherwise. They'll build a blockchain that lets the central government monitor everyone's transactions more easily than would be the case without a blockchain, because the central government can use blockchain to stomp out corruption at all the lower levels of government, which the central government may like very well, but obviously doesn't prevent corruption in the guys who are at the center, right? So, I mean, I think there will be no technical obstacle to a purely decentralized payment network obsoleting global currencies. On the other hand, just as Facebook Libra was sort of stomped on by global regulators, a global cryptocurrency that was efficient, scalable, and decentralized, rather than having Facebook behind it, will have some struggles with global regulators also, right? Now, AI is a bit more interesting, right? Because you don't have that whole global regulatory infrastructure, and it's a little slipperier by nature, right? So it's harder to regulate AI than money, because AI takes many different forms. So it might be that while payment is where blockchain got its start, it might be that other applications where centralization is not as strongly enforced by regulation, it might be that in other areas, blockchain is able to achieve its sort of anarcho-libertarian decentralization goals better. But I mean, just for regulatory reasons, not for technical reasons. So that's and I would say blockchain is also a very young technology, right? Like AI is young in the sense that we don't have AGI yet, but there's a very rich wealth of prototypes and ideas going back since before I was born that are now being matured and brought into practice. Blockchain, we're still much closer to the inception. So for example, I've been working with Tufi Saliba on his TODA protocol to some extent. And I mean, TODA, they don't have yet an open decentralized version rolled out, but they have the core algorithms there for, you know, a decentralized, efficient blockchain without a distributed ledger. So that's, for those who know the software underlying Bitcoin and Ethereum, that would be a completely radical and revolutionary thing, right? So I think there are still fairly basic advances that can be made in the infrastructure of blockchain because it's still a fairly young technology, and so that should be very vibrant next 5 years in terms of blockchain technology development. And I mean, what that means in terms of the economics of the crypto world, I have no idea, right? The whole thing with Bitcoin price speculation and altcoins and cryptocurrencies, I mean, that's been quite crazy and in a way off to the side of the ongoing technology development within the blockchain space.
Yeah, completely. So last question, and cautious of your time, and thank you so much for your input. So you touched COVID-19, and I know that you're doing a massive amount of research, a massive amount of products, and a lot of research. So what would be the message of hope that you have for people listening to us? Because I think it's about messaging as well and about doing things. I know that you are as well a very positive person. You always look at the positive things. So bearing in mind that there's a lot of right now anxiety towards, of course, everything that is happening. And of course, we are humans, we need to adapt towards what is happening. What would be your message of hope, and especially for people that want to know more about Singularity, OpenCog, and all the projects you're doing? How can they collaborate and help and even just get assistance?
So regarding COVID-19, I mean, clearly it's a bad situation. It was foreseen by many people who were warning about the pandemic and the damage it would wreak for a long time, and the world wasn't paying much attention because we're more concerned with the whatever we see right in front of our faces at any given moment, right? So I mean, clearly there will be a vaccine within the next, say, 12 to 24 months, and there will be various therapies rolling out before that. So COVID will be defeated. There will be a death toll along the way, which is terrible. I think for those who want to help the fight against COVID, I mean, for those who are software developers, we'd organized a hackathon called the COVIDathon hackathon, which is running now and is for 2 months. We're halfway through it. So if you look at COVIDathon, it's on DevPost. You can find by SingularityNET.io site. So that's one way that people can help. But I do think, you know, for those who don't have toddlers at home like I do, the social isolation and stay-at-home orders many people are under can be a time to learn new skills and get all sorts of beneficial work done. I think, you know, as well as staying safe and helping however you can now, I think that the crisis we're seeing with COVID now, I hope can wake people's minds up a little bit to the fragility of everything that we take for granted, both in terms of our biological health and the routines of everyday life and society and economy. Because, you know, as bad as the COVID pandemic is, it could be a lot worse, right? Like imagine something that, you know, spread as badly as COVID or had a 60% fatality rate instead of 1% or whatever COVID is now estimated to be, or imagine something like COVID that differentially killed children rather than old people. What would the reaction be to that, right? So then ask yourself, 5 years from now, could somebody genetically engineer a virus with those capabilities, right? Or could that be coordinated with a computer virus that took down the global power networks or something, right? So there's a lot of risk for global crises that we're not thinking of, just as we weren't thinking of pandemics very much. And just as there was a lot of literature warning on pandemics, there's a lot of people warning on all these other global crises that could happen. And they're correct and they're thoughtful, and nobody is paying attention. And we could have had much better systems for coping with this pandemic. We could now be building much better systems for coping with the next pandemic. And the other key point is, apart from a whole bunch of people dying, what will the outcome of this pandemic be? Well, a lot of people in the service economy, a lot of working class people will be put out of work and won't get hired back because businesses will reorganize in a way that doesn't need their jobs anymore. On the other hand, a number of very well capitalized funds are buying up stuff at a very low price now, and they'll be making a lot of money once the economy bounces back. In Hong Kong, Chinese government is taking the opportunity of COVID calming down the protests to arrest many, many leaders in the protest movement and funders of the protest movement, right? I mean, so what you're seeing is a global crisis, is something we're very badly prepared for, because as a society, we're too stupid to prepare in advance, even for things that we know rationally have a high probability of coming. And B, a global crisis is an opportunity for increased concentration of wealth and increased concentration of power, because when things are bad, whoever has more money or more power can take advantage of it to get even more. Whoever has less money and power is struggling, right? And I mean, I feel very fortunate. Like, I'm not extremely rich or powerful or anything, but I'm in a position where, like, I'm not gonna starve due to 6 months of problem or something, right? So and I know many people in the world are not in that position. On the other hand, I'm not in a position where I can buy $1 billion company for $100 million because the economy is bad, and a lot of funds are in that position. So if you have a concern about what's happening with COVID, certainly stay healthy and do what you can to help fight the virus. On the other hand, also try to keep that concern in your mind after this pandemic is beaten, and you can go back out to the bar and party again, and the stock market is booming again. Try to keep in your mind that, in 3 or 5 years or whatever it is, there's going to be another crisis. It may be a little different in character. It may be even worse. We want to have AI systems in place that are controlled and guided in a decentralized way when that next crisis comes. Otherwise, that will be an even bigger opportunity for the institutions holding the majority of wealth and power to accumulate more and more wealth and power. And ultimately, this has to do with who controls the singularity, with who controls the AGI that first emerges with greater than human capability, which controls the fate of all of us, our children, grandchildren, and so on.
Yeah, that's very good. Well, there's probably 10 questions out of that, but I will let you.
I gotta go.
No worries. It's a fantastic. I want to thank you. I have a lot of insights here. We're going to put links to all your bios and websites and different projects. This is a series of a lot of interviews we're doing with world leaders, and I want to thank I would as well for you involved in a lot of different things we're doing, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.